Hi, everybody. I'm Deacon Dave.
I'm Layperson Lisa.
Welcome
Welcome
to
to
the
the Deacon
Deacon
Dave
Dave
and
and
Layperson
Layperson
Lisa
Lisa show,
show
the SMP
edition.
edition, and we are going to be talking about
Forgiveness.
forgiveness. And so, Lisa, this is for our November class, and forgiveness is a topic that comes up quite often in spiritual direction,
Yes.
and often people are really struggling with number one, needing to forgive someone,
Yes.
needing to forgive themselves,
Yes.
wishing they had said they were sorry to someone who
Mm.
is no longer around.
Yes.
So there are any of a variety of scenarios whereby forgiveness comes into play.
And it's a process. So even though you may think you've forgiven someone, sometimes
Yes.
things bubble up and you still discover that you have not fully forgiven.
Yeah, and I think I had that recently with someone that from a long time ago I thought I had forgiven, but I kind of realized that I hadn't completely forgiven them. And so I kind of went through that process and have complete peace in that with regards to that particular person, which is really good. And of course, what comes to mind first and foremost for me with forgiveness is what it says in the Our Father.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Mm-hmm.
And the Our Father is something that Jesus taught us. Yet, I think this is something that we more often than not gloss over.
Yes.
It's really a conditional statement
Yes.
that in order for us to be forgiven, we need to forgive.
Yes.
Now, having said that, I don't think that's the first thing you say to someone in spiritual direction. You're not going to be forgiven if you don't forgive other people. I think
Right.
I think that would probably lack uh, pastoral, as you would say,
Pastoral.
pastoral approach would be
Yeah.
non-existent in that case. So, what are you thinking, Lisa, for our
Well, I
group?
was thinking how I was reading a book and it was talking about justice,
Hmm.
but that God's mercy is outside of justice.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes people think that if they forgive someone, they have to forget that ever happened, or they have to go back into some sort of relationship with them, and that's not the case.
Hmm.
There's just the impact that forgiveness has on you, the person who's lacking, who's having trouble forgiving, is so much greater than the person that you're holding maybe this resentment or anger or bitterness towards.
Yeah, you're the one carrying the weight and the burden around because of that. I also think that there are many people in spiritual direction situations, Lisa, where they fear for someone in their family who won't be forgiven, maybe because of their lifestyle or
Mm,
the choices that they have made. And they, in a real way, feel like that if their family member or someone close to them does not change, that they are going to hell
yeah.
because what they're doing is contrary to church teaching.
Yes.
And so, what would you say to someone in that particular situation?
I actually kind of had this situation fairly recently, and so it was in regards to someone committing suicide,
Right?
and how this person was afraid that their this person was not in heaven, that they were
Right.
eternally damned. And so I told this person the story of St. John Vianney with this woman. She had asked her husband, she was very devout, but her husband was an atheist, and she asked her husband if she could hang the Sacred Heart of Jesus picture in their bedroom. And he's like, yeah, sure. And so sometime later, he committed suicide, and she was just so distraught over the state of his soul. And so she went with her friend to travel to where St. John Vianney was, because he was a great confessor. He just had a real intellect, prophetic relationship with God.
Right.
And so people would line up, and the woman and her friend, they lined up and they waited hours, and St. John Vianney was walking by. He came out of the confessional and he said, "Oh, God wanted me to tell you that your husband is in heaven." And she was like, "Well, how do you know this?" And he said that the moment that your husband said yes to hanging the picture of Jesus on the wall in your bedroom, that was all that God needed to have mercy on him. So God's mercy is so unfathomable, so unimaginable that there's always hope in in people who may not be living a Christian lifestyle, that there's always hope in there.
Yeah, so the church teaches what we know, right? Which comes from scripture
Yes.
and tradition. But God operates any way he pleases
Yes.
in scripture, out of scripture. And I agree with you. His mercy is great. And I think the other part of this, because I think the church's understanding of suicide used to be different. But I think since, I don't know, maybe since Vatican II, or I'm not sure when, to be honest with you, there's a deeper understanding of, okay,
Some
what is,
disorder, mental disorder,
yeah,
or
what,
some sort of illness.
right. And
Yes.
this is probably true in a
Of
lot of
any,
cases.
pretty a lot of situations.
Right. So you can't, if you are not right in a place where you can commit a mortal sin, okay, where you know it, you know it's wrong,
Mm,
right? It's grave, and you do it anyway. Those are the three things that make up mortal sin, as the church teaches. It's very well possible that you are not at that place where you really understand
yes.
that what you're doing is
Yeah.
is not what you should be doing.
Right.
And I mean, I think any of us in our life and our spiritual journey could attest to some of the things that we've done that we now no longer do because of a deeper relationship with God and a deeper understanding of who God is.
Yes.
Right. And I think the other part of this too is like what I see, Lisa, with people, they get, we can get wrapped up so much in what someone's not doing and we're worried about them that it has a very negative effect on us. And so we're no longer paying attention to our own relationship with God
Yeah.
because we are so steeped in worry and fear.
Consumed.
We're consumed with that, that it can actually affect our soul and how we're living our life.
Yes.
And it kind of reminds me of, where they all have their oil lamps, right? And they're waiting for the bridegroom. And, there are people that are prepared and there are people that are not prepared. And I think that part of the lesson of that story is that we can't make other people have their salvation, right? They have to work out their salvation on their own.
Right.
And sometimes, if your child's not going to church right now, we have this like immense fear, or your grandchild's not baptized,
Yes.
this immense fear of what's going to happen to them. And we can pray for them,
Mhm.
we can offer sacrifice for them, we can mortify ourselves, same thing. We can offer intentions.
Mhm.
There's so many things we can do, right? But people have to work out their own salvation.
Yes.
We can love them, and we have to remember that God loves them more than we do.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so he's going to do everything he can, just like he has done in our lives,
Yes.
right? To draw us to himself.
Yes.
Your
Well,
thoughts?
and so, well, it's just free will, right? That God loves us so much that He gives us free will. He gives us the we can choose. And so, because of that love, that's what we're called to do
Mhm.
to those people that we may wish were living out their life differently, but we have to be that give that same love to them and allow them to have their free will and not be the dictator, because that's what is said. Like, well, if God didn't give us free will, He would be a dictator, and that's not love.
Yeah, and I think so often in our pursuit of loving someone, we actually push them away. And instead of just being present and doing the things that we can do for that person.
And I think people underestimate the power of prayer
Hmm.
because God hears all our prayers. He answers all our prayers, just not in our timing or in the way that we see it kind of working itself out. But so when people say, well, I guess I could just pray, like, no, 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 no. Like, yes, that is so powerful.
It's very powerful. Yeah, and more than anything else, it really affects you. God hears our prayers,
Yes.
and he knows what we need. And then, of course, he gets to choose how he wants to answer.
Yes.
But I still maintain so often that prayer it has more of an effect on us
Oh yeah.
than whether God answered it the way we wanted to or not.
Yes. It changes like our response and how
Yes.
we react, and it changes our hearts and how we start to see things a little differently.
Yeah. And it is, I forgot what I was going to say, but it really is good for us to have a greater dependency on God.
Yes, the poor in
Uh,
spirit.
and because people get wrapped around the axle about wanting to control a certain situation or a certain outcome, and it can actually just create an entire set of negatives on its own.
Yeah.
So what do you think most keeps people from forgiving someone?
I think a lot of times they just are so hurt that it makes it so much harder. And so that hurt kind of builds up into anger, into bitterness, into resentment, and it just snowballs and snowballs.
How is it that people feel like if you forgive them, then you are somehow condoning what it is that they did,
Ah,
right? If I tell them, okay, I forgive you, then I'm somehow condoning it. And I think you want to tell the story about Maria Goretti, who we saw when we were in
oh.
Italy, and her story of forgiveness and kind of that whole thing that happened, Lisa.
So she was a 12-year-old girl, and there was a neighbor who was older, and he kept making advances to her, and she just was like, no, 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 no. And one day he attacked her, and she was like, no, 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 this is bad for your soul. Don't do this, don't do this. And he just left her there, and then it turned out she was not dead, and he found that out, and so he came and he stabbed her a bunch of times.
How many
And
total times? Like,
12 or 13,
it was a
16,
lot. It was a
something like
lot.
that. Yeah, yeah,
It
it
was a
was up
lot.
there. Yeah, yeah. Um, and so
She goes to the
she goes to
hospital.
the hospital, and she said to her mom, "Oh, I forgive him, and I want you to forgive him too." And they caught him, they put him in jail, and then she wound up dying shortly after she was in the hospital. And I think he was an atheist, I think, uh, if I remember right. And so he was in jail and, not really repenting for what he did. And Saint Maria Goretti appeared to him in a dream and said, you need to repent so that you can go to heaven. And that just changed his life. He became a Christian. When he got out of jail, he went to her mom's house and apologized. And then and I think he entered a religious order as a brother.
Yeah.
And then he and Maria Goretti's mother were there side by side at her canonization.
Tell me that's not crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
So the man that killed her daughter was sitting beside her at the
yeah,
canonization of her daughter,
yeah.
Maria Goretti. So this is like just a small young girl, right? Yet
Right.
the depth of her, um,
Relationship with God at
yeah,
that young age.
yeah,
I think we often underestimate children's relationships with God, and that's why we're called to be childlike, because they do have more of a purity of heart that I think allows them to have a deeper relationship to God with God when they're open to it.
yeah. There's a lot of innocence there that hasn't been clouded by the world and things that have happened in life. So, what are some other reasons why you think we struggle with forgiving? I think pride is one of them.
Oh yeah.
We want to hold on to it. We want there to be vengeance. We want that person to suffer,
Mhm.
right? We want
Mhm.
them to have their comeuppance, if you will. And that's God's job, like you said,
Yes.
to decide what that's going to be. It's our job to forgive. It is our job to love our enemies, which can be very, very difficult because the subtlety of our enemies is everything from something very extreme and obvious to something that is more passive in nature,
Mm.
yet still very negative. And we can allow those things to have control over us, or we can surrender them.
Yes.
One of the slides you'll see is
We
is that
we don't just lie.
Well,
We send them out.
right. Well, it's anger times Jesus to the third power
Oh,
equals
that's
peace.
December.
Oh, that's anger. Sorry. Okay.
But
Forgiveness times
anger
Jesus to the third power equals peace.
ties in.
Right. Because you can't forgive without Jesus. And so many people said, I just can't do it on my own.
Right.
And
You are right.
and I agree. I had this guy, okay, who I worked with who went to my church. This was a number of years ago. And I did not like what he did. And it was wrong in my opinion. And I was definitely not appreciative of it because it was affecting the business that I was running and our ability to get work at that location. Well, this guy, since he was at the same church, it always seemed like he was on the opposite side of the church as me. And this was a church that was sort of like both sides and the altar was in the middle. And so here I am looking at the Eucharist and I can see this guy across the
Oh,
way. And it's like, okay, Jesus, I'm like, I was so mad at this guy that I wasn't even focused on Jesus. And
mm,
this went on for like a couple of years of just every time I saw him, it made me mad. And I finally just surrendered, which I'm learning how to do that more and more these days. Just surrender and invite God into that. And he gave me the strength to go up to him and say, listen, you may not remember what happened, but I was very upset and I forgive you. And it didn't matter to me whether he thought he needed to be forgiven or not. What mattered to me is that I was actually, like you said, releasing that burden in a real way.
mhm.
What about St. Josephine Bakhita, Lisa?
Well, you're reading her story. You probably know better than me, but she was.
You like telling stories of the saints. I
I
don't want
do.
to steal this from you.
She. Oh, I didn't want to
I'm
say.
just teeing them up for you. Go
I
ahead.
didn't want to say something else before we talk
Go
about that.
ahead.
So you don't. It is not necessary to go to the person and say, "I forgive you."
Right. I
That is
did.
not
Right.
necessary. But just to make, yes, you did. But that is not needed for
And,
the.
and you'll know if you didn't go to the person if you've really forgiven them because that resentment you have, if there's anything residual that's still left there, it doesn't mean you're going to forget what happened.
Right.
It just means it no longer has any ownership over
Yes.
you.
Yes.
And a lack of forgiveness, it has ownership over you
Yes.
in ways that you don't even realize.
Right.
St.
Okay.
Josephine Bakhita, Lisa.
So she was
See if you get it
born
right.
in Africa.
Sudan. Yes.
Sudan.
That's
Okay.
Africa.
Yes, yes, yes. Sudan. Right, right, right. Because the Sudanese came for her canonization. So she was sold into slavery, and she had some people.
She was kidnapped
She was kidnapped. Oh.
by the slave traders
Oh.
as a 9-year-old.
Wow. And the wherever she was sold, I know that she was beaten, she was scarred emotionally, physically, and then somehow this family from Italy offered to purchase her. And they brought her to Italy and they treated her with kindness and love. And I think they were Christian. And so they shared their faith with her. And then she converted into Catholicism. And she said something along the lines of that she forgives her captors because she would not be have the relationship with God that she does today if it were not for them.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
You're thanking the people that kidnapped you and then you set you through a series of being traded as a slave as a young child, for many years, which is kind of crazy. If you to us, you're like, you really want me to thank them,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
have gratitude, right? Because it's one of those perfect cases of where God works all things for good for those who love him. And we were just having this discussion at St. Vincent's on our intimacy retreat, right? How do you deal with, part of what keeps us away from intimacy with God is a lack of forgiveness,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It is losing hope. It's not recognizing that if we just keep loving him in some way, he's going to work things for good. Maybe not the way we would dial it up,
Right.
but he will work it for our good, even if it's just a greater reliance on him.
Yes. Yes. And I think like Josephine Bakhita is an example of that.
And she didn't really as I'm reading her book, it has a lot of quotes from her journaling.
Ah.
And she was very, very not necessarily wanting to share all of this because it might seem prideful
Mm,
or, and but the Lord, basically got her to the point where the story needed to be shared
yeah.
so that people could have a deeper understanding of forgiveness, right?
Yes.
And how God can work things for good.
Yes.
What are you
Yes.
thinking, Lisa?
Well, I was just thinking sometimes we encounter people who um are regretful about choices that they've made
Hmm.
in their past, and it could be years and years and years and years and years previous, and they're still not forgiving themselves, and they still sit in like the coulda, like, oh, I could have done this, or I should have done this. Well, my life would have been different if I did this. And so that is what if we bring these things to confession, then Jesus has already forgiven us in that moment. And we need to forgive ourselves, because if Jesus has forgiven us and we're still holding on to those things, then we're saying that it's a form of pride, because we're saying that what we think about the situation is overshadows what Jesus has already done, which is forgive us.
Yeah, and I think we have to recognize that God is even going to use maybe the bad choices that we made and the things that we've done to still bring about his glory if we don't wallow in or don't forgive ourselves, right?
Yes.
If we just allow his forgiveness to be enough and to be complete, then he will actually, I mean, I would say most of the stuff that I've done in my life that I shouldn't have done is all great content for me to share with different groups of people at different times for any of a number of reasons. Because when we're vulnerable and we open up, it tends to allow the Spirit of God to move more. It helps other people to go, oh, wait a minute, if he's going to stand up here and tell all of us, then I can be open. Well, if he's going to share what he did wrong, well, wait a minute, I'm not the only person that does that or has
Mhm.
that problem. All of these things I think are really important for us to be able to do.
Yes.
Any other saints you can think about right now in terms of forgiveness?
Forgiveness.
What about, was it the little flower, Saint Therese of Lisieux? Is that the right one?
Well, there was a nun she didn't like.
Or apple? Yeah, exactly. So there was a nun she didn't like.
Oh yeah, and the nun was not nice to her, like
Right.
really rude. And Saint Teresa or Therese, Saint Therese like felt like God was calling her to be like extra nice to her. So she would just, with the strength of Jesus, love this nun and just be very attentive to her and go out of her way to help her, and just let any comments that she made just kind of roll off her back. And it kind of affected Saint Teresa's sister, who was also at the same convent, because her sister said, "I think you love her more than me."
Mm.
And she's like, so she just had to, I don't know how, if she explained like, oh, well, no, I love you too, but like this is someone that God calls me to go out of my way to love. So I guess she had to forgive the because when Saint Therese first got there, she felt like inferior in her relationship with Jesus and her knowledge of the faith, and she was very insecure in that area. And that, that the even when she passed away, like the nuns in her convent were like, oh well, she was nothing special.
Mm. So it's like you said, I think you're reading a book on virtues,
Yes.
and you said that sometimes the most difficult people are the most difficult situations are the ones where God uses to help us grow in virtue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so I think when you begin to look at those people that we've struggled with, those people that we need to forgive, we need to ask ourselves, okay, Lord, how in this particular situation are you calling me to grow closer in virtue? Because more often than not, we want to, no, you just need to go hold the other person accountable, make the situation stop. And if you do all of those things, then I'm not going to have any more problems anymore. Might still harbor some resentment against that person, but they're gone now.
Yeah.
But that's not what is often the case.
Well, obstacles are opportunities to grow in holiness, and
Hmm.
sometimes I forget that. And obstacles like obstacles, we can ask Jesus to help us to overcome them or to work through them, or we can run the other way. And Saint Teresa of Avila says, like, she talks about mansions in the book Interior Castle, and she says that we can stay in the room and grow in holiness, or we can move on to another room and try to escape. But you really can't escape.
Run out of the mansion.
Run out, yeah, yeah, because it's always like in your mind.
Yeah, I think in all of these cases, if our focus gets turned back to God and not to the situation or to the person, but then how God is calling us to grow in holiness, it'll make a lot of difference in how we are able to work through that with God
Yes,
to grow in holiness, to be able to forgive, and then to continue to be able to move forward in a real positive way.
yes. I think it's also it's something to keep in mind is that it's a process. It's not like,
Hmm.
oh, this person will never bother, will never irritate or whatever it is. Like, no, that's not necessarily true.
They're going to keep
But
on irritating
as
in
soon
some
as,
cases.
right, but as soon as you feel that, you can feel like, okay, Jesus, give me your strength, like guide me here. And when we make that more of our response, then like, getting all huffy or whatever the reaction is. But if we respond and invite Jesus into it, then it makes a difference. But you were going to tell us the story about a college student you recently talked about.
Okay, but before I
What?
do that, I
Oh,
think a lot of times that when we're grumpy or we have a grudge,
uh-huh.
or we're holding unforgiveness with a person, our sensitivity to what they do is so heightened and
Mm,
magnified in a negative way, such that something that might be perfectly ordinary under normal
yeah,
circumstances that they do is like, oh,
yeah,
can't believe they did that again.
yeah,
But when are
yeah,
they going to? And it was absolutely nothing.
yeah.
Right. So I had this
That's
college
true.
student who had a friend, and the friend just completely stopped talking to them. And no matter how they tried to reach out to the friend, they wouldn't respond. And when they saw them, they just ignored them. And the person could not figure, I just don't know what I did. And this is a long-term, strong relationship broken out of nothing that this person could tell. And so this person's trying to figure out, well, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, well, maybe you didn't do anything.
Yeah,
I said, if you did something wrong, you would know it. I said, it might just be something that's going on in her life
yeah,
that has caused this, or it might be that she's been told some misinformation. And so she's formed opinions and judgments, but that's on her. You got to give people the freedom to misunderstand.
hmm,
But when you have a relationship that you've had with someone that gets disconnected for a reason that you can't understand, there's a lot of hurt there, right?
yeah,
And then there's also grief that comes along with that loss. And so sometimes when you've done all you can do, you have to be willing to accept and surrender to God that, okay, I forgive this person for just completely ignoring me. And to also not try to hold yourself accountable for something
yeah.
that you didn't do. If you've done a good inventory and you can't figure it out and they don't want to talk to you, it's tough, but not a whole lot you can do about it.
Yeah, I think sometimes the tendency is just to blame ourselves and like, okay, what did I do? Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I should have done this, and it puts a lot of doubt into the person that is, that the other person left.
It does. I mean, this plays out in marriages sometimes that are
Hmm.
falling apart, and any of a number of relationships where there's not always a tangible understanding or it's not being communicated to you as it should be, that can create a lot of frustration and hurt and anger and every other thing you can imagine that's not good for
Hmm.
the soul.
Hmm.
So, what else do we have, Lisa, that you would like to talk about as with regards to forgiveness?
Well, sometimes we have to ask Jesus to help us to have the desire to forgive.
I would say in a lot of cases, without the spirit that lives within us, right?
Yes.
We're trying to do the forgiveness on our own.
Yes.
And like, I can't forgive this person. Well, of course you can't. But Jesus, who lives within you, he can do anything.
Yes, yes. And so there's declarations that we can make to start the process. And we could say that I choose to forgive so and so for whatever, and I release them from all bitterness, anger, and resentment in the name of Jesus. And that maybe have some that be something that you have to say out loud several times a day
Hmm.
until the resentment and the bitterness and the anger are gone.
Yeah, you can pray for that person as well, and
Yes.
not pray that God change them, but pray that God's will be done in their life.
Yes. Well, and forgiveness is a choice. And so by saying that I choose to forgive, that helps you to eventually, even if you're like very resistant, eventually get to that point where yes, I do choose this.
Yeah, like it's a process,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, offering sacrifices and intentions for the person that's hurt you, and you're right.
Masses.
Yeah, and or just doing fasting for that person
Hmm.
and for the
Hmm.
goodness of their soul. Now, so where's your focus on when you're doing that? Your focus is actually on God,
Yes.
right? It's on the good for
Yes.
that person.
Yes.
It's not on the negative or the unforgiveness. I can't say this enough, but like everything in spiritual direction has everything to do with us always looking back to
Yes.
Jesus and always orienting ourselves on how we can grow in deeper relationship with him. What are you thinking?
Jesus is the solution to all the world's problems.
Yes, Jesus raised to the third power,
Hmm.
to the Trinitarian power. How's that?
Yes.
Right? Because God the Father wants to create in us anew so that who we have always been might be revealed. The Lord wants to redeem, right, anything that has gone wrong in our lives, any areas of crucifixion or where we buried something. He wants all of those things to be redeemed, right, so that our life might be sanctified by the Spirit, so that we might experience the fullness of God's love in our lives and also to express that same love, right, to the people around us, even those who have hurt us.
Hmm. Well, Jesus became man so that we can become like Jesus.
That's right. And like you said, I love what you said. It's a process.
Yes.
So part of what we'd like y'all to do is to really consider, okay, and to do an inventory, spend time with God and ask him to reveal to you who you haven't forgiven. That's different than you revealing who you haven't forgiven. That
Yeah.
might be the first list,
Yeah.
but then the additional people will be who God reveals to you in the context of what forgiveness. So if someone were going to kind of walk through this, Lisa,
Mhm.
what would be the elements that they might look uh, for someone they haven't forgiven?
So if you think, like we said earlier, if you've forgiven them,
Ding.
you have it.
Hmm.
If you have any sort of, if you get angry when you're talking about them,
Ding.
if you tend to want to gossip about them,
Ding. Very good. That was a good one. I like that one.
if
I
you,
just want to talk about them. I'm not gossiping about them. I'm just speaking
if
truth here, Lisa. Okay, these are just the facts. I've
like
never said that, have I?
the like you said, if like this person does the same thing this person does, yet this person you're having a hard time forgiving this person, and they both do the same thing, and this person like by doing it irritates and makes you angry, you haven't forgiven them.
Yeah, and I think the longer you go with unforgiveness, the more solidified it gets in your heart. And this is not good,
No.
right? I mean, so here you are wanting justice in another person, and the effects of what they did, whether intended or not, continue to grow inside of you. That is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, it's like letting something that's happened just continue to grow inside of you until it takes a life of its own. And I know people like this.
Yeah.
And there are people that it is just one thing that has happened. It has just gone from something like this to something bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And a lot of times too, the other thing is when we leave these things unresolved, we might still be in relationship with that person,
Hmm.
but we haven't like actually just said, listen, let's talk about these kind of things. There's some things you've done that have hurt me, and or there's some things I've done I've hurt you and I want to say I'm sorry. Some people are not. There are people I don't even know what I've done wrong to them, and I
Yeah.
still told them I was sorry,
Yeah.
wrote them a letter,
Yeah.
and they still don't want to have anything to do with me. And
Yeah.
at that point, I was completely like free
Yeah.
because I knew that I had done everything that I could. But
Yeah.
like in the case of my family, when my grandmother died, she was the matriarch of the family, and she was kind of held everybody together.
Yeah.
Looking back on it now, and so the brothers and the sisters we'd always get together for holidays. Everything seemed great, but my grandmother died in some not good circumstances, and and they they stopped talking to each other.
I think that happens a lot.
Right. So things that are unforgiven, things that are
Yeah.
left unsaid. I mean, it's like unforgiving by omission or needing to forgive by omission, where you're not saying something that's
Um,
on your heart. I never thought about it that way, but it's
mm,
like, okay, I really should talk through this because there's something inside of me that I'm bothered by.
yes.
And if people love one another, they can work through anything.
Right.
If you keep Jesus at the forefront, then you can work through anything.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
does that make
Yes.
sense? Any
Yes.
other thoughts? Any other saints? Anything you think we've missed?
Well, I just think that the, for, again, I think sometimes we hold on to things that
Hmm.
we and we don't forgive ourselves, and that is something that you can bring to confession and pray about, and for any sort of forgiveness or lack of forgiveness, just continue to pray, like, okay, Lord, give me the desire to forgive this person, help me to forgive this person, because prayer is, like we said earlier, is powerful in helping us to do that. And it may take a while, but just to persevere and continue to be open to letting Jesus penetrate our hearts in order to give us that healing, because it really is our healing that we need if we're failing to forgive.
Yeah, we're the ones carrying the weight around. So just once again, just to kind of reiterate some points of what total forgiveness is not. Okay, it's not approving or pardoning what they did. Okay, it's not excusing or justifying what they did. It's not actually having to like reconcile to the point that you have to be in relationship with them.
Hmm.
It's also not denying what they did.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna ignore, it happened. And oftentimes it's like, yeah, this thing happened, but I'm gonna love in spite of this, right? Being blind to what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, forgetting that ain't likely to happen, right?
Right.
Refusing to take it seriously, and pretending we're not hurt. None of these are part of forgiveness. These things are going to happen,
Right.
and so we should expect that this is going to be oftentimes a part of these things are still going to exist as a part of forgiveness.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we have some other ones too. There's a whole bunch of lists of things like what is total forgiveness, right? It's
Mm.
being aware of what someone has done, but you make an active choice to forgive them, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to keep a record of the wrongs, which that's a tough one,
Yeah, but that's
right?
what Jesus does. He like
Yeah.
do you want a saint story?
Go ahead.
So Margaret Mary Alacoque, she is the saint that Jesus appeared to and gave the Sacred Heart of Jesus devotion. And so Jesus said, "Oh, hey, go tell the bishop that we need to start this devotion." And when she did, the bishop said, "Well, ask Jesus the next time you talk to him to reveal to you what the last mortal sin was that I confessed." And she said, "Okay." So Jesus appears to her and she asks him, he tells her, and she goes back to the bishop and she says, oh, so he says, "Oh, hey, did Jesus tell you what my last sin was?" And she said, "Yes, he did. He said that he forgot." And so Jesus does not keep a record of all of the things that we do wrong, that he has forgiven us. And so we're called to do the same.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. They use the word that he forgot, right? Of course, God is all knowing, so he already knew what they did wrong before they did it,
Yes, yes,
right? Yet he chooses to forget what's attached
yes.
to that. And that's what we need to do because there is so much attached to when we're hurt and us holding on to unforgiveness. And I think we can all acknowledge that depending on what it is, the length of that process that we've been talking about can be quite lengthy.
Yes.
And it also depends on the relationship that you have with that person.
Yes.
But I will go back to this point again that so often um, forgiveness and the difficulty of forgiveness and the harshness of forgiveness could have been eliminated had there been better communication about things that were maybe being left unsaid leading up to something that happened.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think whenever you begin to have a tinge of something that's uncertain, it's not clear, there's a hurt, just go ahead and start talking to that person
Yeah.
about it. Just be open about it. Let them know how much you care about them and love them. And then work out whatever it is, because it is, when you let things go, there comes that moment, right, that the devil's just ready to strike
Yeah.
and create division in a
Yeah.
way
Yeah. Yeah.
that feels unreconcilable.
Right.
Anything else?
No, but so often we do let little things cause us to cause conflict
What do you
in
mean, Lisa?
relationships.
What do you mean? It doesn't take much, does it? And a
No.
lot of that's born out of our own insecurity
Yeah.
and things that we really need to be working on with Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm Deacon Dave.
Thank you for Lisa.
Forgive somebody.
Bye.